thank you for joining us. So this is, as some of you know, the Saturday Forum, and this is your chance to say anything you would like to say, preferably about something connected to what's going on here this weekend, but if you want to throw something in left field, well, if it's interesting, please do. So we have a panel of guests here. Some are speakers from this weekend. Some are people who have been speakers in the past and almost certainly will be again. So let me introduce the panel to you. We'll start left to right. On the left here, you will be seeing this gentleman tomorrow. This is, I'll tell you about the bell in a minute. This is Mark Devlin. And Mark is the author of a book called Musical Truth, which attempts to identify some of the hidden messages in modern music and potential manipulation. And we're going to hear something about that tomorrow. So please a hand for Mark Devlin. Next to Mark, we have a lady called Lucy Pringle, known to almost most of you here. You will have seen her out there with the stall. She's one of the classic crop circle researchers, and she's probably now, I would say, the best-known aerial photographer of crop circles. And she was once a council member of the Centre for Crop Circle Studies and is still going strong. So please, Lucy Pringle. And to my left, those of you here yesterday will have seen Peter. Again, Peter's down in the stalls room. Earth mysteries, archaeology, history, written many, many books. And we're hoping we're going to get some input from that side of things today. So please, Peter Knight. To my right, we have Pippa King. Again, those of you who saw Pippa yesterday will know she has a lot of concerns, quite rightly, about the surveillance state and has an awful lot to say and is right at the forefront of campaigning to make a difference, not just complaining. So a big round of applause, please, for Pippa. And the vision in white on the far right, we have Mr. Richard Smith. Richard's spoken here several times before and is the author of the book A Future World Vision, which is out there somewhere. And Richard has plenty of opinions, and we're looking forward to them. So, Mr. Richard Smith. And I ought to add, also once council member of the Centre for Crop Circle Studies, so that is also there. So, the rules. Basically, there are no rules, but if any speaker is speaking and you get a ting, that means if you could close down soon. If you get double ting, that is it, right? Absolute finito. And we'll see if we can get through without any tings. So, if you have anything you would like to share, we've got Sheila roaming with the mic, we've got Jason roaming with the mic. And we have a question over there immediately, so please fire away.
Yes, I wonder if the panel can throw any light on what Todd was saying yesterday when he was talking about his out-of-body experiences. He said he'd tried to go to the moon and also knew a colleague who'd done this and tried to go to the moon, and he met those dreaded cones and was diverted to a room where he met somebody, and they were either shown a scale model of the moon or they were shown photographs of the moon. I think he said he made 20 attempts to try and go there. Also, I've heard that we can't go there more conventionally by spacecraft if we ever did manage to get there in the first place. But I wonder if the panel have any idea what intelligence might be trying to stop us going there, or shed any light onto this problem at all.
So, what intelligences might be trying to stop people going out of body to snoop on places like the moon? Anybody have something to share? You don't have to, by the way. There's no obligation to say anything, but no feedback? Mark, come on, Mark. I can see a twinkle in your eye. You must have something to say here.
I think I'll stay out of this one, mate.
Yes, stay out of this one. So, no? We needed Marcus Allen here for that one, really, didn't we? Oh, he's out there somewhere. Oh, well, we're not going... I'll give you an answer then. There's nobody else who's saying something. I mean, if you do believe that there are powers that would stop us trying to snoop into places, I think they would be people, certainly we wouldn't know who they were. I think anybody that is, aficionado of conspiracy theory will know there are various layers, there are tiers, and I would I think the kind of people that would block out-of-body experiences would be extremely adept with psychic work, and this is stuff that even presidents and prime ministers probably wouldn't even be aware of. So they're probably so secretive, I doubt that we could ever identify exactly who they were, but they would have to have great power. Did we have somebody? Yes, Lucy.
Yes, am I
You're right, yeah, just hold it right near.
No.
Yep.
Well, I think they'd have to have tremendous power, but at the same time, there are people who, just as you have the light combating the dark, if you're powerful enough yourself, I believe that you can actually block those powers. And so I still think that it might be quite a battle, and it might be an uncomfortable battle, but I'm a firm believer that the light overcomes the dark.
Fair enough, yes. I think that's a good point. Yeah, indeed. I hope that gives you some kind of response. Thank you very much. Okay, another question or another point. Yes,
we have a question on this side.
We have a gentleman here.
Hi, this is a question for Andy, primarily about Brexit, or it's open discussion.
I'm not meant to be really answering the questions here, but
okay.
briefly.
All right, sorry, okay. Just
but carry on,
debate,
because I'm sure there will be other
It's
comments.
related to what you spoke this morning. So, to what extent, if there is, the New World Order, the corporate New Order, would be affected by the Brexit? And is it a side effect, or it's something else? Thank you.
It's a good question. I mean, I touched on it ever so briefly when I mentioned the Bilderbergs and things like that. I think here's the thing. If you look at the overarching sort of state of the world over the last few decades, the New World Order is real, by the way. It's not a conspiracy theory. It's a genuine project. And always the idea has been to put lots of power under very few hands. And so traditionally for a long time, and many speakers here have discussed this from the stage over the years, the EU has been seen as one of those superstates, which, as we discussed as well, is very controlled by the USA, and it was seen as steps towards this unification, which gives a lot of power away to many different hands. Now, the question is, therefore, did we do what was required of us unwittingly, or, have we broken ranks? My personal gut feeling is we have broken ranks, and I don't think they now quite know what to do. I'm sure they will have some kind of contingency in plan. But it may be we have changed the course of history here. And, I think there's many things we could say here. But I think Richard Smith's got a few things to say about this. I'm going to pass you to Richard here.
I think essentially the entire Brexit debate, especially from, for example, the moneyed corporation side of things.
If you hold it nearer to you, Richard, and then they can
from a moneyed corporation side of things, essentially, I think big business said almost universally, the Bransons, the huge banks and so on, that we need to remain because it's a really good idea. Of course, it's a good idea for them because the status quo commercially, they had already paid the huge costs of compliance with the European Union regulations. 95% of British business has nothing to do with continental Europe and is still subject to those regulations, and that is a distortion. The other thing about the Brexit debate is that what hasn't been aired is that if we had voted to remain, that would have been a stamp of approval for the European commissioners, who then would have said, the British have approved of what we're doing. The motive for reform would not have been there. So anyone who thinks that we would have reformed from the inside is deluded.
Yeah, I quite agree with that. I don't know if anybody saw Jeremy Paxman's program. Did anybody see that?
Bits of it, yeah.
It was absolutely excellent. He was completely factual. He wasn't biased in any way, but he went out and he investigated everything that was happening in the EU. And our effect that we have on the EU, it's supposed to be enormous. In fact, it's almost minimal. We had the very, very smallest effect on what goes on, all the dictates that happened. Our voice was absolutely minimal. And I think that was the scaremongering, everything was going to be disaster. And I think they've been proved wrong. I think it's going to be a time of turbulence, as Andy said. But amongst my friends, there was a complete dichotomy of opinion. But one thing we said above all, this must not become a personal issue. And whatever your view was, as Andy said, you've simply got to go forward. But I think there was a general misconception, just as Richard was saying, amounts of power we had in Europe. And we were misled, in actual fact.
I mean, Pippa, can I ask you, because control and surveillance, this sort of spins off from that. Do you feel that being out of the EU makes us less vulnerable to that, as vulnerable? Does it make no difference? I'd be curious to know what you think there.
The smart city agenda that's happening in Glasgow is funded by the EU. So there's 4 smart cities in the EU, and one of them is in Glasgow.
Do you want to just, for anybody that wasn't here yesterday, explain smart cities very briefly?
Smart city is a city that's interconnected with Wi-Fi, so they have smart lampposts that can see where footfall is. Essentially in Glasgow, it got given £24 million to make itself smart from the British government, but ultimately the project is an EU project, and the smart city projects in Derby, Manchester, London. So I don't quite know how those projects will go ahead now that if Brexit happens, but surely that won't happen for a couple of years. But yes, as far as the EU goes, there is a big agenda for surveillance. But having said that, there's just been a regulation that was passed at the end of April called the General Data Protection Regulations, which actually is a very up-to-date form of a regulation sort of dealing with big data. But I've worked with MEPs and I've worked with commissioners in the Department of Justice at the EU. It's like treading through treacle, working with the people in the EU. I think the concept of being together is good, but I can't see the model that we've got at the moment working at all. So.
Okay. I mean, Mark, you, I'm sure, will have something to offer here.
I'd just like to add a quick observation, which is that it's become clear that the controllers, the elites, the cabal, call them what you will, operate to timetables. And they plan things years, if not decades, in advance. So when it came to this whole Brexit EU situation, they would have had a plan in place for where they wanted things to go. And I would agree with the general consensus, which was that a big spanner was thrown in the works with this vote. And it's caused a great deal of hassle on their part. And I think we can conclude that it's set them back in their plans to a very large degree, and we need more of this. And if people remember, a couple of years ago, we had another little example of what happens when people take back the power and make it clear that they're calling the shots. And that was when Cameron first started banging the war drums for wanting to go into Syria with military strikes. And the British public made it known very clearly that they did not approve of this. It happened anyway, but at least it was a demonstration of how it does set back their plans when we make it known that we're not consenting to where they want to take us. It's a little reminder of where the real power lies.
Okay, very good. Very good. Did you want to say anything? Okay, well, I think that gives the flavour, and thank you for that question. Thank you. Okay. Another question, please. Okay, gentleman next to that gentleman.
Hi, this is a question for Mark Devlin, I think. So, last century something happened with the musical scale, like with, I'm not a musician, but with like do, re, mi, or G, C, and something to do with the changing of a frequency.
Is it the frequencies?
Yes.
432 versus 440, yeah?
Yes, that's it. And with solfeggio frequencies.
If you can speak in a little bit closer, that's it, I think.
And do you know how can we find music that's using the better frequency system or the solfeggio frequency system? Music that might be more uplifting and positive, perhaps. Thank you.
Well, I think the easy answer is to avoid music that comes out of the big corporations, all the big record labels, all the big mainstream A-list celebrity household name acts. It's pretty much a given that their music is going to be mastered to the 440 frequency, which is not the one we should be listening to music at. So
Can you explain to anybody who doesn't understand why the frequency makes a difference?
Sure. Well, the international standard tuning pitch for recorded music and for musical instruments used to be 432. And when you speak to musicologists and sound engineers and such, they will tell you that that's a very harmonic, natural frequency. It syncs very well with human brainwave states, the human energy field. It's just natural and harmonic. And the standard was changed towards the end of the Second World War from 432 to 440. And now pretty much all recorded music that you hear coming out of the corporations is tuned to that pitch. And again, these same musicologists will tell you that 440 has the opposite effect of 432. It's very discordant. It produces dissonant kind of feelings, and it doesn't sync well with, you know, human energy fields and such. So you've got to ask yourself why that pitch was chosen to be the standard. I think if you're trying to find music that is mastered to 432, you've got to look at independent musicians, independent record labels that are free of the corporations. There are actually websites where you can take recorded music that has been mastered to 440 and it alleges to convert it to 432. So it's in a much more harmonic state to then listen to. I'm not a sound engineer or producer myself, so I've not tried this, but there are sites which allege to do that. So that might be something to look out for.
Interesting. Yes, Pippa.
In the city where I live, we have I know a piano tuner. He tunes the piano in the city hall, and when the Russian orchestra comes to play, he has to tune it down to 432. So there still are orchestras, as far as I know, that do still play to that frequency.
Interesting. Peter, you do musical experiments, don't you, in ancient science? Do you have a feeling about this?
Hello, 1, 2?
You're on.
Yeah, I'm on. Experiments, I don't experiment with my attendees, but yes, perhaps I do. We do regular shamanic drumming on Dartmoor and in a cave near Bristol, and famously, I guess, at West Kennet Longbarrow. And they found out many years ago that there's certain frequencies that you can activate your psychic areas at sacred sites, and it tends to be the deeper ranges, almost like a whale. You know, I'm not saying we go in and do whale sounds when we do but sometimes it ends up at that, and I think people find their own what resonates with them, you know, as to what makes your soul feel good, and no matter all the crap that's out there, you will resonate to what makes you feel good. And when we do our West Kennet shamanic drumming evenings on the full moon, we have a time where we put all the drums away, and I say to people, right, we're all just going to make our own sound now. Whatever you want to do, we'll just make our sound, you know, and any sound is okay within reason. And it's amazing how we all start off a high voice, a low voice, somebody's sharp and somebody's flat, and then in the end we all tend to find after a few minutes, I notice we're all doing the same sound, and it's not because somebody's dominated it by, you know, being louder than the rest, and it's always a different note as well with every group, and I kind of wait and see how it evolves, and it's quite amazing. So that this group of souls has come together. Most of them have never met each other before at this place of the ancestors, and we've found something that really resonates and wakes up our souls. And then we have a quiet time where we go, and we seem to have opened this portal to the ancestors, and people have amazing experiences then. So we know that sound has always played an important part of every religion, every tribal culture. Sound is so important to opening up your psychic areas. So yeah, I agree, don't bombard yourself with sound and mainstream radio. There's music that doesn't serve you, because it's having a negative effect on your psyche.
Interesting.
So surround yourself with music that nurtures your soul, because it is.
Just one more brief thing on frequencies. Richard, you were involved in campaigning against tetramasts, weren't you? Because they operate on a frequency that is damaging. Do you want to just quickly share something about that?
Sure. I mean, I think we were all unwitting guinea pigs in a home office experiment which inflicted 3,300 tetramasts, which is terrestrially trunked radio, which was introduced for the blue lamp services. Essentially, this operated, I think, at just over 17 hertz, just the human beta brainwave level. We're the only country in the world that allows this system to operate. It has its origins in weapons systems, as they all do. But I stood as an independent MP in the general election of 2005 in a three-way marginal in Cornwall, and we basically said, well, no one's ever voted for this. So dangerous things can happen. I didn't get involved in blowing one of the masts up, but we were the last two out of the 3,300. And we kicked up an almighty stinking Cornwall about this. And dangerous things happen, and they're done in our name, and we often don't... This was a John Prescott initiative, and many of us have no idea this is going on. And the threat with terrestrially trunk radio is simple. With a mobile phone, when you press go and enter the conversation, when you end it, you're out of the loop. With terrestrially trunk radio, you're not, and it's permanently bouncing. And if you happen to live where it bounces, you might be in for leukemia and things like that. So lots of odd things happen. So particularly dangerous, pernicious system, and we never voted for this. But the police service is using it, the ambulance service is using it, and
you'll need an
and the fire
ambulance after
brigade.
you've used it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you, Richard. Okay, great question. Thank you for that. A question over there, in towards the back there. If, Jace? We all need some exercise, don't we?
Thank you. Just hearing you all talk about music there reminded me of my absolute musical hero, Prince, who sadly left us this year. He was very much into the Schumann resonance, the gold standard, all of that. And of course, that got me thinking about the big one, the celebrity deaths, which Jason touched on yesterday. And, you know, everyone's saying, oh, it's just a coincidence. Well, of course, we all know in here probably there's no such thing. And I'm really interested with such a varied group of people, what you think about all these souls departing, because I've seen it in the celebrity world, and in my own life, I've seen so many people, heard of people dying, relatives of close friends, and seeing people's relationships ending that I know. And suddenly there seems to be a year of closure, so I'd be really interested to hear what you guys have to say on that, but especially about the celebrity deaths.
So, clusters of celebrity deaths. Anybody wish to say anything? I mean, obviously, people like Ronnie Corbett was an old man, bless his soul. But yes, there are others who are not in that bracket who, of course, have passed away. Does anybody have anything to share?
Can you clarify the question?
Well, many celebrities have died, just, you know, in a big cluster in the last few months, really, haven't they? And Gemma was just wondering there, you know, whether there was something more behind it. Is it just chance, a coincidence? So, Mark, did you have something to say here?
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure what the deal is with other types of celebrities, the TV presenters and the actors and such, but when it comes to the musicians, there are certainly suspicious elements behind all these high-profile deaths, not least Prince. And I've gone into many of the anomalies and discrepancies that we have with the details surrounding Prince's death. It is interesting to me that so many of the artists that pass away in an untimely fashion are ones which have had some kind of message of upliftment or love or inspiration for humanity. Prince made a lot of songs like that. A lot of his songs were about sex in the early days, but a lot of his deeper stuff was very reflective music. Michael Jackson, same way, towards the end of his career, he was making a lot of very reflective, deep music. Then you have the likes of John Lennon and Bob Marley and so many others that you could cite through the decades, and they seem to be the ones that just happen to meet untimely deaths. Whereas, you know, the Miley Cyruses of the world and the Lady Gagas and the Britney Spears and the Jay-Z's and the Beyoncés seem to have no problem with anything like that. So I certainly wouldn't throw out the idea that the industry does knock off its own artists when it sees fit to do so. And with Prince, there are many incentives which have been cited as to why they might have chosen to do that. He started talking about chemtrails in interviews. He started questioning the official narrative of 9/11. He's even said to have made a comment to the effect that the genocidal Jews who run the music industry are the reason I will never play Israel. So when you're a celebrity and you come out with things like that, it can affect your life expectancy, I feel.
Anybody else have anything to share? No? Thank you for the question. I don't think it answers it, but you get an idea that there could be something there in certainly some cases. Okay, we have another lady over here.
Yes, just thinking of that, there's Club 27, isn't there? All these stars seem to have died at that particular age. And from here, in past symposiums, I found out the importance of number 108. And 27 is a quarter of 108. I often wonder if there's any significance in that. But also I wanted to ask you another question about Juncker, because he said he'd been talking to leaders of other planets. He was quoted as saying that, so two questions there.
Does anybody like to respond to this?
I can take the 27 question.
Okay, yeah, start with that one.
So the 27 Club is this group of musicians who have died at the age of 27 under one circumstance or another. So the number includes the likes of Jim Morrison, Jimi Hendrix, Janis Joplin, Brian Jones of the Rolling Stones, Amy Winehouse, Kurt Cobain, it would appear to be a highly out of proportion number that have died at that age. 27, as you point out, is a very interesting number because it's the start of a cosmic sequence where if you double it each time, you go from 27 to 54, then 108, 216, 432. I think we've heard that number before in this conversation.
Yes.
And then 864. And when you start to look at things like the dimensions of the sun, moon, and planets in terms of the measurements that we're given, you find that these numbers crop up time and time again. It's also encoded into precessional ages, 2,160 years, an expression of the 216. So you see multiples of 27 cropping up time and time again in these circumstances. And in each case, it's the only cosmic sequence where the numbers always add up to 9. So you start with 2 and 7, it's 9, 5 and 4 is 9. Then you reach a point where you start getting 18 as the total. And when you add the 1 and the 8 together, you always come back to 9. And it's the only sequence in the universe where that happens. So very fascinating business with the numbers.
Thank you. And would anybody like to say anything to the other point that was raised? Oh, apparently not, sorry, but I'm sure it's a very good question. Okay, do we have another question, please? Good, that was a nice easy session then. No, we have a gentleman here.
This is a question for Pippa. Pippa, as a father, I'm a little bit concerned about surveillance state. And so I've got my daughters on Facebook and things like this. What sort of advice would you give to your children in that regard?
Good question. Both of my children are on Facebook. I think this is the age that children are going to be living in, and I think they need to understand how surveilled they can be and how to use tools like Facebook and Twitter and WhatsApp or Instagram in a way that protects them. And I hope I've taught my kids that the privacy levels are very high. Whether or not the agencies can get through the privacy levels, I suspect they probably can. So I think it's prudent for any child or really any of us to keep our digital footprint as light as possible. And that's the advice I would give them in any sort of sense if they can do that.
I mean, that does raise a wider issue because I know a lot of people are very concerned that young people, but very young people, are cut off from nature and their whole world is digital. I'm wondering, Peter or Lucy, you work with nature very often and out there. Do you have any feelings about the good or the bad side of modern technology and children?
Yeah, sorry, do you want? I think it's like surveillance. I don't get too wrapped up about surveillance because it's all about balance, isn't it? We do need surveillance. You know, some murders and crimes have been solved because people have been caught on surveillance. Those people may not have been brought to justice, but for the surveillance. And I walk past my town. Caen is not a rough town, but it's a kind of working class town, and I can walk through there every night. I think I actually feel safer because of the surveillance, to be honest, because they do have some rough brawls outside the pubs there. So although there mustn't be too much surveillance, I 100% agree with that, because that's the short end of the wedge about control and everybody knowing what you're doing all the time. I agree, but I think we'd be worse without surveillance. That's my personal opinion, but it's got to be measured, like we've got now, but no more, perhaps. Because, as I say, it's I know of some high-profile crimes. That guy, the soldier, who was murdered by the barracks. You know, I think there was one witness at the time, but they got it on surveillance. So open and closed case. So, what was the other part of the question? I've rabbited on nature. Yes, we went past a wall the other day, and there was 5 teenagers sitting on the wall, all next to each other, all on their mobile phones, not talking to each other. We've all done it. People are communicating, but they're not talking, and they are separating themselves from nature. And I think it's a great worry because, as well as you're separating yourselves from the nurturing, energetically beautiful, empowering part of nature, you're also open, of course, to being fed all sorts of crap the more you're on the internet. And I've got mixed feelings about the internet, you know, although it enables people like Andy, you know, to expose what's not right in the world. You can also be fed a load of crap, and this is the double-edged sword of the internet, isn't it? And I sometimes wonder, I think one day, you know, perhaps it would be better if the plug was pulled out, you know, and I actually think that might happen anyway. And kind of on the other part, I'm actually quite infused with the enthusiasm that Brexit voted to leave. I think that was a fabulous statement that we can only take so much. But hopefully... but yes, it's vital that you get in touch with nature. I take groups onto Dartmoor, and just walking around nature, even without taking them to a sacred site, or anyway, just walking them out in nature, just fills them with something that you can't be fed through a mobile phone or the internet. That's where the heart of everything is. That's what it's really about, connecting with this earth, not being fed stuff. So yeah, get kids out in nature.
Lucy.
I worry hugely. I know we have to have technology, but I worry hugely about the young generation and, in fact, many of the, well, I suppose the teenagers, because they don't get the chance to get out into the countryside. And even when they do, many of them don't know the names of the birds, they don't know the names of the wildflowers, they don't understand the seasons, and they don't hear the music of the planet. They don't hear the music of the natural world. And when I take people into crop circles, for instance, they experience the most extraordinary things, quite unexpectedly. And sometimes I long to take children in to give them a greater understanding of the land around them, and as Peter said, the sacredness of it. You have a music of the universe, a music of the spheres. They don't know anything about astronomy. They just don't really... All they seem to know is their mobiles or their iPads, or constantly conversing between each other without actually communicating in words. It's almost as though they've forgotten how to spell, they've forgotten how to communicate in words, let alone understand nature for what it is. And when I was taking people into a circle to do medical tests this summer, whether it was a genuine circle or not, I don't know, but the power of the land, it was at Hackpen, the power of the land actually spoke to you. And many people had extraordinary experiences because they let themselves go and they forgot their troubles, they forgot this and the next thing, because to me, nature is a treasure, and we've got to understand the power, the love of the planet in which we have, and we can't. We may do an awful lot to try and destroy our planet, but you can't. The nature is more powerful than anything, and I wish people could just understand that and appreciate it and love it for what it is. And incidentally, I've got 8 tickets to go into Stonehenge, on private entry into Stonehenge on this Thursday, and if anybody wants to come, because again the stones speak to you, and to be able to go in and get right up to the stones and see the sunset behind them. Many people have been into Stonehenge with me, and they've burst into tears, and it's as though they've come home. Because if you listen to the stones, and if you listen to the song all around you, it's a unique experience.
Peter, I think you wanted to come back in there.
Here, I reiterate everything you say there, Lucy. Yeah, in terms of children, there's quite a lot of projects going around the country now, and I think there's funding for more where they take a lot of teenagers who have had had a lot of problems, ASBOs, from deprived families, and that sort of thing. These are kids like right on the edge or even over the edge, and they've taken them out for the weekend to a sort of a boot camp they thought it was going to be, and they spend the weekend gardening. They spend the weekend going around, no mobile phones, and after the initial few days of rebellion, I'm not doing all this crap, and by the end of the week, they are saying, when can we come back next year? The lives of these inner city kids have been changed. They'd never been in a wood. They'd never planted a plant in the ground. And I've seen a program on it recently, and it brings you to tears. These rough kids who if you saw them coming down the road, you cross over the road of a night, and it's changed their lives just simply because they've had the chance to interact with nature, and it's beautiful.
Very good.
Yeah.
Richard, you wanted to share something?
You mentioned children and social media. One of the things, as some of you I think know, that I'm involved in the optical industry. I'm pleased to see so many people wearing glasses here. It's essentially one of the things that in our professional journals, one of the things the human race has lost in the last 20 years is an hour of daylight, which is not out there anymore. So we're looking at all these screens, and we get a lot of blue light emitted from these things. So yes, it's true we're communicating more, but actually we're communicating much less. Now, I'm seeing people at the age of 25 that I would not expect to see until they were 45. Your eye muscle rotation system is being worked hard, the pixelation on the screen. People have no idea, and we really don't have any idea because we haven't been exposed to it really for long enough. So we live in a screenocracy, as I think I put in my book. We do live in a screenocracy now. I spend a bit of time on the beach in India in the winter, and you can walk down the beach and bump into people bumping into each other because they're looking at the screens. And you couldn't be in anywhere more beautiful. So I would urge you, if you have children, restrict TV access time if you can and remain their parent. Restrict small screen time if you can and remain their parent. It's very, very tough, but believe me, it will pay long-term dividends, and that's one thing you really ought to pay attention to, I think.
Okay. Can I just, last word, Mark? I mean, Mark, you're in the digital world, you're a DJ, you're with youngsters now. Do you feel good, bad? What do you think are the main issues there?
I'm actually the least technical DJ that you'll ever meet. I'm a total Luddite, where my peers are all DJing off of laptops. I still use CDs. I'm someone that's quite suspicious of technology for very much the kind of reasons that Pippa goes into with the surveillance state, and that is bordering on transhumanism. So I'm just very skeptical and suspicious about technology generally. But I just wanted to make a quick observation about online stuff. Twitter, which is very popular with young people, I hate it myself, but people are probably aware that Twitter restricts you to expressing yourself in 150 characters. And for anyone that's tried to say anything meaningful of any kind of value in 150 characters, you'll appreciate how difficult it is. And I think the popularity of Twitter is a way of restricting young people, who mainly use it, from being able to express themselves fully. And this was actually an aspect of Orwell's 1984, restricting the amount of language that people had access to, the amount of words to truly express what's on their mind. And I really think the popularity of Twitter is tied in with that, because you just can't make any meaningful point on it. It's just an observation added to
so
the
it's kind of newspeak, really, isn't it? Yeah. Okay. Pippa, you wanted to...
I just want to say one last thing. I as a result of learning about the education system, we took our kids out of the education system and we home educated at high school level. And the home educating community is getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And we're more able to do that because of the resources on the internet. And one of the things that I think we stress to our children more than anything else is how to be discerning. But there's so much information out there that wasn't there sort of 30 years ago. We got it from books and encyclopedias. And education is completely different now than it was when I was at school. And I have to say, as a consequence, children are taking information from a vast range of sources. And quite a lot of parents that get in touch with me are because their children are telling them this is wrong. So I think, although we're living in this digital age, I do think there's some good side to it as well. There's a lot of children that are awake out there, and they're not just watching mainstream television anymore. They're taking their information from a lot of different sources. And as I say, if you can home educate, it's the best thing we ever did for our children. Take them out of mainstream education and get them to look at life. And we spent a lot of time outside, and they weren't in a classroom, and it was very organic and it was great. So I think the world's changing in that sort of sense. I think that there is a huge amount of surveillance when you're online, but I think there's big alternatives as well.
So as ever, it's all about balance. Thank you. Right, we have another question here. You keep your hand up so our people can see you. That's it. Thank you.
Oh, hi there. I think it would be amiss not to have a flat earth question. I don't really have a question, but I really loved what Todd had to say about it. I can see you've got a slight curvature in the photograph there, but you know, one of the great points that's been made about the flat Earth is the astrolabe, which is like the first computer that was made that's thousands of years old, that shows that the stars have been mapped and they haven't really changed over the last few thousands of years. And if we're hurtling through the universe, you know, why can we see the same star system? And also, you know, and so that to me is the whole issue about control and control of consciousness. And also the other control, huge issue is the geoengineering and the lack of sunlight. And I just think it would be nice to hear some opinions about those two issues. That I think.
Can I just ask you, are you saying that you believe the flat Earth theory might be correct? Am I understanding that correctly?
I think there's a lot. I don't think it's hard to prove either way because we've got a lot of information that's being withheld from us from NASA about the moon, etc. Okay. So it's hard. There are a few things that could say, yeah, it's round, you know, but, you know, for example, the lenses do go concave and they do go cave, and so I think there's a lot of arguments for and against, but I loved what Todd was saying about, you know, the plane of consciousness, and I think that's where the issue is. It's a control of our consciousness, and I think spiritually that's my...
All right, well, there's plenty of material there. Right, would anybody like to share a view? Geoengineering, flat Earth? Peter?
Something about the stars that they have changed a little bit, and yeah, but mankind's history on this planet, of course, dealing with the stars is quite short. So in terms of the flat, I think I wonder whether Donald Trump actually is an advocate of the Flathead Society. I think he is. I can see a listen there. Yeah, the stars do change. I think I don't go with the flat Earth, of course, because we have satellite photographs, and if you go up high enough in a plane, you can see the curvature of the Earth. Sure, you know, NASA photographs can be doctored. We know all about the Apollo stuff, but you can't doctor, you know, because I've been up on a very high aircraft, and you can actually see the curvature of the Earth quite easily yourself, and that's the reason you can't see a ship. You know, that's why a ship disappears over the horizon, because the Earth is, I don't see how you could explain that any other way unless it's falling off the edge. But yes, I respect people's views. You know, some of them are wackier than mine. That's saying something. You have to respect where everybody's coming from. But yeah, the star positions have changed in the last few thousand years. You know. No, because the human, over the last few thousand years, it's almost imperceptible. But, you know, I've got programs now that can take me back, and I can stand on anywhere in the planet. I can go back 10,000 years, press a date in right to the minute, and it'll show me what the stars looked like at that time. So, and they are a little bit different from now. Some constellations have hardly changed at all. Orion has looked the same for 50,000 years, because all the stars are actually next to each other in the sky. It's not a line of sight effect. But when I look at some of the other stars, you wouldn't recognize some of the constellations if you go back sort of 20,000 years. So yes, it shows you how the fact that they don't appear to have changed in the last 4,000 or 5,000 years actually shows how that the universe is in for the long term. You know, the movements of the stars, you know, when you consider we're moving around the galaxy, it takes 26,000 years to get around the galaxy. So, of course, in the 5,000 years that we've had civilizations, well, no, more than that now, Göbekli Tepe, in the 9,000 years we've had civilizations, they haven't changed much to the naked eye, that's for sure. But okay. It's all on the move. Everything is always moving in the universe. Nothing stands still. Wonderful.
Richard, thank you, Peter.
In my corporate existence some years ago, I had the misfortune or fortune, depending on your point of view, of going to America several times on the Concorde, and you can actually see the curve of the Earth from up there, and you also see colours that are absolutely magnificent because there's not much interruption going on. And it's an incredible thing to see, but you realise how massive the place is. And then when you think, well, our galaxy apparently is something like 100,000 light years across, and the next one, Andromeda, is 2.5 million light years away. We are absolute grain of sand in the whole thing. So it's just amazing, and enjoy it, because it's brilliant. And I was talking about this yesterday, actually. Regret and guilt are corrosive, so whatever you've done yesterday, you can't change. You hope you wake up tomorrow, so today's actually what you can take to the bank. And I think if more of us actually realise that being in today and being in what's going on is actually something that's very constructive, and we might all be a bit more pleasant to one another if we realise that.
Thank you. Mark.
Well, I missed Todd's talk last night, so I'm not familiar with what he spoke about, but I'm personally entirely open to the idea that the Earth may be a flat, motionless plane. As far as I'm concerned, there are compelling arguments on both sides, but when it comes to the suggestion that we live on a flat, motionless plane, the arguments on that side of the fence seem far more plausible and compelling to me. I can't prove it either way, and as far as I can tell, nobody can. So we are left with our intuition and our best guess based on information that's available to us. But when you kind of redraw the model in your mind and get the globe model out of your subconscious and start thinking about the model in a different way, it does provide explanations for all kinds of things, such as why the constellations appear to move and, you know, why we have all these other phenomena. And if you had never been told that the Earth was a globe and you were just using your own personal observation as you went through your life, who would come to that conclusion? We only are led to believe that we live on a globe because we get this information from Royal Society, scientific communities, various aspects of government departments, NASA and such. So if you are someone that is suspicious of the way these organisations operate, as I tend to be, it causes you to question the validity of anything that they tell you. So I'd just like to say that I'm entirely open. It could be either, I can't say, but it remains a possibility.
Just playing devil's, thank you. Just playing devil's advocate, though, so, of course, the comeback to that would be, why don't people fall off the edge if it is a flat plane? So, any thoughts?
Well, I'm going to get the bell if I go fully into it, because it's a long one. It's a subject area that you really have to throw quite a few hours of research at to fully absorb it. But the general consensus is that there is a ring of ice around this flat Earth model, which is what we think of as Antarctica. So this is what researchers into this field state, and that is effectively holding everything in. That's the very quick answer. There's much more research that can be done on it. Again, not necessarily nailing my colours to that particular mast, but that's an option which is available for people to consider.
Peter, I think you'd like to say something.
Yeah, I'm not going to get into the Apollo landings and you know, the fact that NASA is a government department, etc., etc. I personally believe that we did go to the moon. But clearly not going to the moon also sells a lot of books. So, yeah, it's I think for me the green movement started in earnest in 67, 68 when the Apollo astronauts started sending the first pictures back of Mother Earth. You remember those first pictures where you see the Earth floating in this black void of space? The whole planet was suddenly on our screen in one photograph, and that pulled on everybody's heartstrings. And it was also the start of the green movement, I think, because then you saw the Earth, how fragile the Earth was, and how small it was. And, you know, if we are being fed stuff to that extent, why would we even be given that image? Because the green movement on the whole is against everything industrial and commercial, isn't it, and banking. So why would that image have even been allowed into our consciousness by big business, if you like? And that's why I think that is a real image. The Earth is round. The Earth is round. If it wasn't, you know, why would we be fed the very image that's going to start the battle against industrialization and globalization? Is my question.
Through the round window, that takes you back, doesn't it?
To me, I think it is a valuable subject to really delve into because, again, I think it really is like the roof of the control grid, not only for information, but our consciousness again. And I think I really encourage people to look into it. I think it's fascinating.
Okay. Richard would like to say something.
Okay, this might be quite useful. I was at the Scientific and Medical Network conference in April, and there was a talk given by Dr. Larry Dossey, who was seemed to run the state of Texas from a medical standpoint, and this guy is a really sharp character. There are, I think, 126 medical schools in America, and now 92 of them take consciousness and spirituality very seriously, which I think we can all find a bit encouraging. So when we talk about all these things, I do urge some caution here because the scientists are coming towards us, okay? Now that can only be a good thing, but what it really means is that we really do have to have a little bit of rigor. In other words, If you offer the scientists the most wacky, ridiculous things, believe me, you will not engage them. But there are two sides, if you like. If there are two sides to this, and most of us accept that there are, the scientists are actually coming in our direction. So we ought to respect that, but we also need to give them a coherent, sensible menu, if that makes sense. So the wackier and the more stupid it is, we will get no respect from them whatsoever, but the learned PhDs are heading our way, and I think that's terrific.
Okay. We have another question.
A question for the panel
Sorry,
with an observation first. You'd think Brexit and Europe was the only thing on earth. I think Europeans are about 7% of the world population, about 500 million. There's 7 billion people on earth, and we're seeing the institutions and everything crumbling. People know something's up. We don't know what it is. My question for the panel, how can we get the biggest question answered, which is at least half the people live in poverty in the world. How are we going to include those in the narrative of the future? How do we get that question? That's why people are leaving their home countries. How do we get 3.5 to 4 billion people included in the narrative?
Okay, well, Richard. The 7%, in Europe, for example, we have 7% of the population, 25% of the world's GDP, 50% of its social costs. Frau Merkel from Germany is very fond of actually quoting this statistic. I think it's also true that 50 people hold half the world's wealth. Well, this is patently ridiculous, and if that goes on, then revolution actually is not far coming. So we go back to the French Revolution. 1789 was about the time when things actually got a bit stupid, and it just shows you what can happen. Now, follow the money. Essentially, until we sort out the taxation system, we haven't got a hope in hell, because the taxation system is not fit for purpose. Now, go back to David Ricardo, who published a book in 1821 on how the taxation system ought to work, and he was a free trade proponent. If you tax the value and the use of land properly, because you can't take an acre of land and do some funny things with it in a funny bank in a funny country. Somewhere like Canary Wharf, which generates billions and billions, probably pays a few $100,000 in council tax, I don't know, but it ought to be paying billions to the exchequer. So if we actually change the taxation system, we have a sporting chance of redistributing the wealth, because if we don't, we're in for an even worse time. And that means reforming the entire democratic process and bringing it down to local level. Because until people get an actual contribution and an honest voice in their affairs, as they did in the referendum, which is why the vote counted, it's not going to happen. We're not going to reform a society which is becoming more and more unjust and, frankly, unfair.
Does anybody else like to offer anything? No? Okay. One more question over there.
It's quite a quick question, really. Regarding, it's a word that keeps cropping up, certainly in the last few years, the word elites. And we hear it in relation to being manipulative. We've heard it about technology with children, etc., etc. And just wanted to ask the panel, where do they think the elites are, and do elites exist? One little thing I'd like to just add, to give maybe a little bit of help, is that I've been doing some research into evolution and so on. And a friend of mine who knows someone doing some study with the Dead Sea Scrolls has discovered that the myth of, again, Andy was talking about myths, of Noah's Ark, that it turns out that animals 2 by 2 going into this ark boat. But the Dead Sea Scrolls seem to throw up an interesting concept that maybe the ark was misconstrued, and that it was actually ark is actually a pointed building. So could the ark actually, in fact, being a pyramid? And was it not animals? Because it makes sense. If we were in a state of disaster or whatever, we wouldn't go and build an ark to save all the animals. We'd try and find somewhere to save our information, to store our information.
So what's your key question for the panel?
So the key question is, is it possible that there was information stored in an ark, in a pyramid, that was saved, somehow passed through the centuries, and handled and controlled by a group of elites who understood this technology, this ancient wisdom, and that they do exist? And is that a thought that you have? Is this something that the panel may believe that elites do exist? And do they? Is it possible that they might start to expose themselves because of something like the Brexit situation, where people, they thought they'd manipulated their minds, but in actual
We'll have to
fact,
go for fairly quick answers here because we're running short. Has anybody got anything they would like to share about that? Mark?
Yeah, I'll give you a quick one. The elite ruling class, call them what you will, absolutely do exist. And the key to it seems to be genealogical bloodlines in terms of those that are calling the shots. These bloodlines go right back into the ancient world. They've often been connected back into Sumer and Babylon and ancient Egypt and places like that. So they've gone through the generations to present day. It's certainly feasible that they're sitting on hidden knowledge in terms of the nature of reality and how to manipulate energy and the secrets of the universe, but I don't feel they're doing that for benevolent means. I don't feel they're sitting on that information for the upliftment of all humanity. I feel that they're keeping that information to themselves to gain a tactical advantage over everyone else. They are absolutely steeped in dark occult religious practices, and they very much understand how all this stuff works. And they've been using it against us for very malevolent, nefarious means for a very long time. So the key to breaking free of this is for as many of us as possible to start to come to this knowledge that they themselves have been hoarding. And you get things like Freemasonry and other secret societies which sit on, this secreted information. And again, I feel that's not for the benefit of all. These people are keeping this information to themselves because they don't want the rest of us to be aware of it. So for me, it's a very malevolent agenda.
Peter. We'll have to be quick.
Yeah, you're right. As you know, I'm not a great conspiracist. All I would say to that is that people, that for the whole, I've studied ancient cultures, as you know, for quite a while, and most of the population have always been controlled by relatively few people. It's nothing new. So this is why it's going on now. In ancient Rome, that or that was determined by one man. So we've always been controlled, and probably often negatively, by relatively few people. And in the other answer quickly to who are the elite, we're all the elite. We're every one of you. We're all elite, and it's all about finding your personal power, isn't it? As Pippa said earlier on, can they control us if you don't let them? That is the thing about, this is why we're all here, this is why we all go for self-development, because the more you get into empowering yourself, the less I believe you can be controlled. So, we're all the elites. Yeah.
Now, I'm afraid I'm going to cut in here because we've got literally 3 minutes left. So we're going to do what we always do. We're going to ask the panel one by one, positive ways. Where's the way forward? Where are we at? Final words. Lucy, you're looking animated. We'll start with Lucy. It's got to be 30 seconds, I'm afraid, or the bell comes in.
Very, very quickly.
Yes.
I'm born with my glass half full. And so I don't think that's anything to do with me, because I believe this is genetic. I know many people who appear to be positive, in fact, have glasses half full. Mine has always been half full. And I do just think that many, many ghastly things that happen to us in our life, when they're over and done with, you suddenly say, well, thank goodness that actually happened, because I learned so much due to it, and now some things have turned out to the better. And if this hadn't happened, then I wouldn't be where I am now. So I think we look forward in life and do the best we can, and to not just ourselves, but to everybody around us.
Lovely, thank you. Richard? 30 seconds. Sorry.
We live in.
Nothing's impossible.
We live in a magnificent place. The planet is something truly fantastic if we give it an opportunity, and if we play our part to make a kind contribution. There is no value in endless wars that actually prove nothing. All that happened is lots of people die, and we're back to where we were in the beginning. So I think, frankly, I was born with my glass full. I think it's a really, really good place. Lots and lots of really good people, and I think what's happening today, strangely enough, there are some bad things happening, but I think it's very, very encouraging, and I have a lot of hope for the future. If everyone has a smile on their face, we're away.
Mark?
For me, the solution to everything lies in consciousness, in conjunction with free will and consent, which are our greatest spiritual gifts, just an understanding of that. And the art of causing change to occur in in accordance with consciousness. That's actually an Aleister Crowley quote. But that process can be used for benevolent, uplifting means as well as for evil means. So the answer to everything is in consciousness.
Thank you. Pippa.
We live in really interesting times. I think you should think that nothing is impossible. You can achieve really whatever you want to achieve. And I think what you put out is what you get back. So if you put out lots of positive and love, then hopefully we'll all get that back from each other. And I also agree with you completely that the world is amazing, and we should all just be part of this amazing experience that is life, and just go for it.
Thank you. Last word. Peter.
I'm a glass half full man, really, definitely. So if anybody wants to fill the other half of my glass in the GMP tonight, I'll be more than grateful. I'm just going to say, you know, please connect with the planet, please connect with nature, you know, and that will be a lifesaver for you. Because as I said yesterday, we're not fighting to save the planet. We're fighting for our right to be on the next part of this planet's evolution, because it'll go on without us, with or without us. And I'm going to end up with the last words of that great man Gandhi. He said, "You must be the change you wish to see in the world."
Thank you. Before we thank the whole panel, thank you for coming in here. It is lunchtime. We'll be back at 2:30 for Matt Campbell. If you are leaving now, which you are, because you've got to go actually, please take everything with you. Don't leave anything in here. But a big round of applause, please, for our panel.